We're live.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the SACOG Land Use and Natural Resources Committee for Thursday, August 3rd, 2023. We're going to go ahead and start off with Pledge of Allegiance. Director Harris, will you lead us in that?
I would be happy to. Please pledge. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with
liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. Next up is roll call, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bulhan.
Here.
Frost.
Here.
Gore.
Here.
Harris.
Here.
Kennedy. Here. Nisley.
Here.
Kozlowski.
Here.
West.
Here.
Vice Chair Baines. Yeah, let the record show that Vice Chair Baines is here. I think having some technical issues. Vice Chair Lozano.
Here.
And Chair Bradford.
Here, full house, very nice. Okay, next up is public communications. Would you like to go ahead and read that, Robert?
Yes, at this time, we're accepting any public comment from any member of the public. 1 second, I'm looking at my email here. I'm seeing no members of the public wishing to make a public.
Okay, great, thank you. So next we'll move on to the consent items. There are 2 items. Are there any board comments on those items, or does anyone want to pull anything? Okay, seeing none, is there any public comment on the consent agenda?
There's no public comment.
Okay, great. Let's entertain a motion to approve then.
I make a motion.
And I'll make a second. This is West.
Great, thank you, Bulhan and West. So roll call vote, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bulhan.
Aye.
Frost.
Aye.
Gore.
Aye.
Harris.
Yes.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Nisley.
Yes.
Kozlowski.
Yes.
West.
Yes.
Vice Chair Baines.
Aye.
Vice Chair Lozano.
Aye.
And Chair Bradford.
Aye,
Motion
great.
carries.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to action items. We have 1 action item today. Item 3, Green Means Go, planning category contract assignment for Meadowview Station. And Garrett?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A quick action item. So these next 3 items all relate to Green Means Go, which of course is the region's homegrown program to accelerate housing and development in our existing communities, our infill areas, what we're calling green zones through these programs. So you'll be hearing next from the City of Yuba City and their efforts, and then I'll be talking in 2 items about sort of what we're doing with the program writ large, but just a quick action item for your consideration about awards you made back in March on that first round of Green Means Go funding, that first set of awards. And so what we're asking today is just to clarify one of those awards, the contract assignment. There were 2 partners involved with that, the City of Sacramento and Sacramento Regional Transit. It works best for all those partners if the contract would go direct to Sacramento Regional Transit and not have to have the City of Sacramento be the intermediate step. Just a quick thing to emphasize, it probably should have been clear in the staff report. None of this is new. We knew the whole time that structure of this project and the 2 sponsors. We had conversations with them jointly in advance of the application, and then in the review of applications, it was clearly identified in that application, the Meadowview one we're talking about today, right? The City of Sacramento is the sponsoring agency and Sacramento is the implementing agency. So I know there was a couple of questions on the committee about, is this new, is this different? No, we knew this all along, and then like we said, we found when it got time to execute this award, it just made sense to take out that middle step, not have to have the City of Sacramento be the interim. So again, we're asking for your consideration to move this onto the full board, and happy to answer any questions on that.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from board members? Any public comment on this item?
Is no public comment.
I think we do have a question from Director Lozano.
Not a question, but I want to thank Garrett for clarifying that. My initial question was, would this have been awarded regardless of how it was laid out? And the answer was yes. So I appreciate it. And I'd like to move the item if there's no further discussion.
Kennedy,
Okay.
second.
Great, thank you, Director Lozano and Kennedy. Roll call vote, please.
Directors Mike Harney, please indicate your vote. Director Bullahan,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Gore,
Aye.
Harris,
Yes.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Nisley,
Abstain? I don't believe I was at that meeting to make the decision.
I'll note for the record. Kozlowski,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
Vice Chair Baines,
Aye.
Vice Chair Lozano,
Aye.
and Chair Bradford.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great, thank you. So next, we're going to move on to the informational items, starting with item 4, Yuba City planning efforts, bringing in residential infill. So Greg, I think you're going to be doing the intro for this.
Yes, I'm Greg Chu. I'm on the planning staff at SACOG, and periodically we try to bring some inspiration to the rest of the region about what one jurisdiction is doing in terms of planning, specifically either infill or any of the blueprint principle concepts that we're trying to show other jurisdictions how examples can be done. So this month, a lot of stuff is happening in Yuba City, and we thought this month it'd be good to share a couple of the things that they're doing. So today we have 2 speakers from the city staff. First, we have Ben Moody. He's the Public Works and Development Services Director for the city. He's been with the city for 15 years and 20 years in local government experience. He serves as a city surveyor and engineer. He oversees 14 divisions with 115 full-time employees, encompassing engineering, maintenance, utilities, and development services. He's a graduate of Cal State Chico, and he's a trustee of the Britann Elementary School District. Serves on the Sierra Credit Union Supervisory Boards, a member of the Sutter Lions Club and the Sutter Youth Organization, and enjoys mandarin farming in his spare time. I've known him for 15 years and I didn't realize that about him. It's good to know. And then Ashley Pochechnik is the city's development liaison. And she's been with the city for 2.5 years. Prior to this role, she's earned a degree in landscape architecture and environmental planning from Utah State University. As a student, she thrived in leadership and community development positions to further promote equitable and sustainable planning, and developed a passion for active transportation. Ashley spent 2 years overseas gaining cultural and professional insights and fulfilled a lifelong dream of biking in Copenhagen. As a planner, she promotes urban green spaces, bike lanes, and pedestrian-only zones with an emphasis on increasing community engagement and improving public health. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ben and Ashley and ask Lynette to put the slides up for the presentation.
Thanks, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving us the time to chat. And, really informal. Greg hit us up about some of the things that we're doing to try to make a difference on bringing new residential development to Yuba City. And so with that, I'll go through this, but please feel free to hit me up with any questions as we go through, and at the end, obviously, too. So I guess go ahead and next slide. So just real quick, we're going to hit on some of these items. These are just a few of the things that I think some of the key ones that stand out for us over the last year or so. With the ULI study that we've been in partnership with SACOG, the Green Means Go, Green Zones with the SACOG infrastructure grant that was recently awarded, and we're working forward with overhead utility policy that's that hits. I think that's kind of something that's this. It's behind the scenes, but it's a big deal on feasibility to make some of the infill happen that the city's worked through. Some of our recent Bridge Street corridor improvements and SACOG's partnership with that, and how we're handling some remnant land pieces. Development liaison position, which has been key for us just to help streamline some of the communication that Ashley's been appointed to the last year, making efforts with that. And then some of her efforts in that position with UCAN, with Yuba City, a new permit planner online tool, and then some of the zoning audit and ADU stuff that's going on in partnership with SACOG and some of the funding. So next slide. So to kick things off, in coordination with Marysville and SACOG, we did a regional effort recently over the last 6 months or so, where we've partnered up with Marysville, with Adventist Health and Blue Zones up in Yuba City, and we really did a target analysis. We took a piece of property that was an infill site that was in one of the green zones that was identified by staff to be somewhat ready to go for residential development. And then we did a deep dive through the ULI study to really figure out what are some of what's the feasibility and the hurdles. And so through that study, we really got into the weeds with this group as far as what type of density does the development need to be? What type of density is it townhouses? Is it apartments? And then if it is a mixed use, what type of rents need to be possible in order for this to develop? And what we found out of that really was that things don't pencil unless you're at a certain density and a certain anticipated rent. But then it put a real number to that, which allowed the hospital and for the city to look at options, as far as what does it take to get over those hurdles. And it also helped identify a couple other sites that the city's working through to try to zone and become kind of shovel ready. So they're not just stagnant, but they're really looking at some property that we're going to rezone and then go after various grants and also meet with some developers to try to push for, make it so it's ready to go and get over those hurdles. So that's one effort that we're currently working through with the EOI. Next slide. And the green means go. Green means go in the green zone. So I know many of your agencies are doing similar stuff. Really, how Yuba City is broken up, we really have two zones. To the west of 99, we have this promotion zone is what we're calling it. And then the infill zone is in the older part of the city, is how we're doing it. And then we've really been coordinating with SACOG, and we were successful in getting a grant that provided sewer infrastructure to a multifamily parcel. And then with that, we're also working with the owners and some potential developers as they come through to really highlight that site to try to bring some multifamily development to Yuba City. And so that's been, I know it's kind of a homegrown effort and based on funding, but we're really happy to see that and keep promoting that, working with SACOG for that effort. Next slide. So a couple of the things that, for us and for me, it's kind of like, what does it take to get residential in development with, that's good development. It's not sprawl. It reduces vehicle miles traveled. It uses existing infrastructure, so the maintenance is less, and it just really makes a better city. And so some of the things that we're really working on is this Bridge Street corridor is a major arterial that cuts through the city. And with that, when we widen the road, there's some remnant parcels that we've been working with SACOG and through different funding to really figure out how to rezone that, how to make it maybe for townhomes, and how to get a layout and how to figure out the impact fees, and then maybe also do some preliminary designs so that we're trying to make this as feasible as possible so a developer could come in and then turn that into a residential ready development. So that's what's going on. So right now, that's a relatively recent picture on the left. I think since then they've poured in the sidewalk and some of the curb, and they've switched sides of roads, but that's going on that left picture. And then on the right, this isn't a great picture, but what I want to highlight on this, and I think is a real deal that maybe other agencies could take a note on, is our overhead utility policy. And so for years, Yuba City said, with development, when you came into develop, you had to underground. And everybody wants to underground because it's ugly. You see these overhead utilities, they look horrible. But what's happened over time is that there's winners and losers. So if you're on the wrong side of the street, your property is burdened with this PG&E and utilities versus the other side of the street. So then you have these spot developments that haven't gone developed because of that utility burden. And then just over the last decade and a half, the way PG&E and the costs have changed just due to the time delays with design and the construction and the specifics of who could do the work. And then just the cost is ballooned, more than $1,000 a lineal foot. We've come up with a policy that the city has worked with city council to adopt. And it's a game changer as far as making infill properties viable, where we've set a minimum where we have a lineal foot cost that said, hey, this is the going rate to underground, $1,000 lineal foot, whatever it is, and it inflates with time. And we're saying that property owner cannot make it worse, so they can't add more overhead to it, but they also need to spend a minimum of 25%. So instead of saying you got to spend $1,000, you have to at least spend $250 per lineal foot to make it look better. And so that could be anything from getting rid of the lower portion of the lines where you have some of the AT&T and the Comcast lines that are a little bit easier to underground. So you're getting rid of the crossings, the street crossings, and then it also goes towards landscaping and relocation. And so what we've heard from working with the developers and doing it, that's huge, just because of the time and the cost that goes into just having a blanket statement that says you need to underground the utility. And then with that, the city has taken a hard look at impact fees, because really, no matter what the zoning and the zoning audits and do that, it really comes down to a feasibility with the pro forma with it. And so the city's really taken a really in-depth look at our road impact fees to make them match realistic what the city wants, and then our park fees to match what the parks want to be. So there's not hidden neighborhood park fees later on. It's to consolidate those and try to figure out how do we put those fees in there so the developer can see what those fees are and then it's ready to go. And so those are some efforts that we have going on. Next slide. Okay, so this is one of the positions that's been great for us, and I'll introduce Ashley Potochnik, who's been a rock star for our team and help coordinating. And it's really, we're always here, government's complicated. I know other agencies like Sacramento and different Woodland have, and even Yuba County now have this point person. And so we've taken from that and we've really established a point person to help be that communicator and help internal, get them to the right person timely. So if there's a question, how do we communicate where they're at? So they're just nobody's sitting there turning their wheels and they're getting the right answer. And so with that, we've established a development liaison, Ashley Potochnik, who's one of our planners. She wears a planning hat. So she knows some of the technical side of things as far as the processes, but also she's that point person to get public works or parks or, the administration part, everybody up to speed so they could communicate. And so I'd like to turn it over to Ashley.
Thanks, Ben. So we can jump to the next slide. One of the big things that we started with this new development liaison position when I stepped in was to establish a support network for businesses to get through these hurdles, like Ben mentioned. So in January of 2023, we launched the You Can with Yuba City initiative, which is just kind of a catchy tagline, but the focus of it is to really build connections and communication to get development done in Yuba City, because it can be tricky. So we wanted to not only have a single point of contact, but a very kind of like a project manager approach of working with different divisions, different departments, et cetera. So that was a big initiative that we launched. And then on the next slide, a big part of the You Can with Yuba City initiative is having an online portal for everything you need to know. So we partnered with OpenCounter to develop this online software. It's called Permit Planner, and we have 3 different portals where the community can check zoning, can check where they can put their business, how much it's going to cost to have a business there, how much it'll cost for construction or renovation, etc. And then get a step-by-step list of what permits are needed, who they need to contact, how they apply, etc. So it's a really user-friendly mobile or desktop, any time of day brainstorming tool that people can use, and we found it to be really effective. It just launched in June of this year. So we're really excited about that new software. Next slide. And then just to kind of wrap it up, we're also working with SACOG on several housing initiatives. So this is more in the planning specific focus, but I'm really excited about the projects we're working on with the REAP grant. We have 2 right now that are just in final stages. One is a zoning code audit. So we're looking at hurdles or things in the residential and commercial zones that might be prohibiting development, and looking to update our zoning code to reflect some of the findings. And then we're also working on developing an accessory dwelling unit and SB9 guidebook, kind of a step-by-step how to do ADUs and SB9 development in Yuba City so that we can provide that to the community. Next slide. So that's kind of what we have for you. If there's any questions, I know Ben and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Director Gore?
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. One quick question, Ben, about the utility undergrounds and the 25% not putting the entire burden on one developer. Have you had any takers as of yet?
Yeah, actually, quite a few. You know, and it's just a matter of kind of tracking it, but it's actually been pretty popular over the last couple of years for those parcels that have been infill. Because the burden has just been so high. So people are loving it. But pretty much every commercial development, I would say, over the last couple of years have been on this vacant parcel that's had those burdensome utilities. And so they're seeing some traction. I mean, it is, I mean, there is the slight negative that, hey, they don't go away. Everybody dreams that they go away, but they're just, in reality, the cost and the burden is just so substantial that it just sits there as vacant right now. And so that's kind of where we landed, is that, you know, improve what we got, but to move forward.
Yeah, that's great. You have to be creative when it comes to infill. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Director Lozano.
And I'd be happy to share the policy. It was a council item that was adopted. And so I know we're doing the research. We were really trying to look into what the other agencies in the area were doing and how they handled them. And it's kind of a mixed bag as far as municipal code or discretionary or what. And so I'd be happy to share if anybody is interested.
Yeah, real quickly, I guess my question is more for maybe Ashley, but in terms of the UCAN with Yuba City initiative, how if any, is a partnership with your local Chamber of Commerce to help drive that? Is there one? And then at what level does each play a role?
Yeah, we definitely are partnered with the chamber. They help a lot with advertising this new initiative, and also a big part of UCAN was that we wanted to get out into the community. So we've been hosting these shop talk events all year, and the chamber has been participating in those. And our next one is actually in partnership with the chamber just in a couple weeks. So we have a kind of like a lunch and learn and talk to the community, kind of a roundtable discussion. What can we do to better assist you? Are there any hurdles you're experiencing? And it's been a really great partnership with the chamber.
Thank you. Yeah, and then also is the presentation, the slides going to be available after?
Yes, I will have those posted to the website, and I'll send them a copy to each one of you guys.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Ben and Ashley, for the presentation. It's very insightful.
Great. Thank you. Any additional board comments or questions? Okay, I don't see anything. Oh, yeah. Director Harris.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to appreciate everybody for listening, and also thank Ben and Ashley for the hard work they do. And Ashley, like Ben said, she's really becoming a rock star and coming up and comer and really put her face out there, and some of the creativity that she's generated. You can with Yuba City, the shop talks and things like that, becoming very popular, getting a lot of momentum and legitimizing everything that a lot of us have talked about and wanted to do for the community for a while. And it's all kind of coming ahead with Ashley and under Ben's leadership and support. So I just wanted to publicly thank both of them for that, and we're looking forward to things to come.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Director Klosowski.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Ashley, if there's something that you saw or experienced in Copenhagen that you can bring to Yuba City. I've been there
Bike lane.
also, and it's a delightful place, but it couldn't be more different.
Yes, it is quite different. I would bring more bike lanes, honestly, protected bike lanes. That's what I'd like to see. Not just Yuba City, let's get them everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
Hey, Chair Bradford,
Yes.
unless there's any more board comments, I just, yeah, first of all, thank you, Ben and Ashley. It's great to work with staff like this at a local jurisdiction. You all remember when we kind of developed the concept of Green Means Go and green zones long ago, and there was understandable concern. Hey, what would it mean for small places and small towns and small cities, right? Yuba City is a pretty big city, but I think it's, it was great. I know Director Harris, like you have been on infill development, revitalizing downtown Yuba City, building the bike infrastructure, right, for quite some time now. So the fact that Yuba City is at the table participating, they've got those green zones, they're combining that with the sort of streamlining, right, and like being a one-stop shop. And we're able to get the grant through Green Means Go, and hopefully we're going to get a lot more money. Stay tuned on that, but just really delighted to see, because I love Yuba City. I love the downtown. I see all the potential, right, and making that, breathing some more life into it, along with the Bridge Street corridor and the 5th Street Bridge. So I just want to say congrats and thank you for all of your efforts and being great local partners.
Well, we look forward to working with everybody, and thank you for the time.
Great. Thank you, Ben and Ashley. Appreciate you guys being here. Okay, next we're going to move on to item 5, next step for Green Means Go. Oh, Director Baines, do you have something?
I was just waving at Ben and Ashley.
Oh, okay. Thanks. So next up's item 5, Garrett.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We really thought the structure worked well of bringing a local partner in to talk about what they've been doing around infill, and then we wanted to come right after that, talk about Green Means Go. So I know you all interface with a lot of programs, and this is just one program at SACOG, but we wanted to take a little bit of a deep dive and talk through Green Means Go with you today and kind of where we're headed next. And of course, Green Means Go, right, our homegrown program around infill development, and the cornerstone of that was this first round of funding that the board just approved back in March. That was, that supplemental action you just recommended earlier on was about that, really demonstrating, right, the potential and really backing up sort of the thesis we had about Green Means Go, about there's serious barriers to doing infill development in our region, but there's also serious opportunities if we can match it with that funding. So I think the tagline is, as the staff report lays out, there was that one-time funding for Green Means Go. It's different than the transportation round that the board considers every few years, which has a recurring revenue stream. This Green Means Go was a one-time funding, but we still think there's a ton of relevance for the program in a variety of ways, which I'll talk to in the staff report. And it's too bad Ben dropped off, because I was going to thank him too, but I did not know he was a mandarin farmer. This is an aside. I planted a mandarin tree this spring and it's not doing very well. And so I have to ping him. But if you live in Orangevale and you can't plant a mandarin tree, something is wrong. So next time I'm talking to him about the variety of all this great stuff up there, I'm going to ping him on that. But I think that's the key takeaway too, of the complexity of infill. So much activity is already happening at the local level. Yuba City is just one example of the 28 jurisdictions, everything goes on. But SACOG's Green Means Go program, right? How does it interface at the local level, and how does it also interface at the state and federal level in terms of funding resources? So without further ado, I just want to give a little bit of that background. I'm going to go, item or program area by program area following the staff report. And again, I recognize it's harder for you to track maybe these sub aspects of the program, given the number of things you track, but we thought it was a good time to just talk through about what we've been up to. So not to bury the headline, as I mentioned, so much of the momentum around Green Means Go was that first tranche of funding that the board awarded. We continue to look very hard at ways to augment that and to repeat that and bring new funding into the region for Green Means Go type projects. So our external affairs team has been working very hard. No news right now. We're still looking hard, but I think if you follow the staff report, that first round at Green Means Go was with some state resources. That's a little bit more difficult, we think, in the near term, but there's a lot of federal opportunities right now. These new federal programs that are being stood up that we're looking at very, very closely. There's definitely some challenges though too, in that Green Means Go is very, very unique in its approach to infill, right? It's trying to recognize that each green zone, those corridors that your cities and counties have nominated, the barrier to realizing infill is going to be different in each one of those. So there's no one size fits all sort of approach. A lot of times these funding programs are very siloed in sort of what they want to see. So that's some of the challenges we're coming up against, but we do think on the federal side is something we're looking very closely to in terms of there's a way to augment sort of the funding coming in for Green Means Go type projects. But at the same time, of course, funding is going to be a critical need for any of these corridors or these green zones. We just think there's so much that can be done just utilizing existing tools. And that's why I thought the Yuba City example was so great. They talked about some grant programs. They also talked about what they're doing from a streamlining approach, from a policy approach. And so we're looking at that in the same way, right? SACOG can play a role of sort of compiling sort of best practices from a policy perspective, right? We're also trying to do a better job of existing funding programs that are out there. We feel like we're pretty well positioned to weigh in. And as an example, some state programs that are talking about sort of the same things for Green Means Go. We feel like we can kind of help sort of be a translator of how that would resonate here in the Sacramento region, because as we said all along, sometimes when the state talks about infill, the nuances of the Sacramento region gets lost, as you know, James mentioned the Yuba cities, right, of the world, right? We want to make sure the state understands, yes, there's infill opportunities in those types of built environment. And then finally, are there tools out there that can be used to help on the financial side for infill? We're trying to get our head around that. So again, the tagline for the second bucket, the first bucket was trying to find more funding. The second bucket is how can we use existing tools, existing funding sources, and existing non-funding sources like the policy side to help infill pencil. And then we think there's a role for SACOG to play interfacing both with the locals and that step up with the state and feds. When we've been talking about Green Means Go for the past several years, we've been talking about the program as a large, and we've been showing the green zone maps, those green zones that the cities and counties have adopted. What's been really helpful for us has been to talk about some tangible projects. And what does it mean? What's the barrier? What's the cost? What would it take? And so what we want to do is, of course, continue to communicate the green zones as a program region-wide, but also roll up our sleeves and be working where there's an opportunity and where it makes sense with your local agency staff on what we're calling green zone specific strategies. So one of the examples that Ben and Ashley talked about was that Plumas Street ULI study, the Urban Land Institute study. That's a really great example of what that could look like. Again, that was a very tactical approach of looking at an individual parcel, right? Partnering ULI, City of Marysville, Yuba City, and us, and specking out developmental concepts about what that could look like as an infill development. So much more tactical, small scale for SACOG that we usually take on. But we feel like, again, there's a role for us on thinking through where it makes sense to be engaging in green zone specific strategies, working with their jurisdictions, not just saying green zones writ large need X, Y, or Z. And then finally, partnerships. We've had the benefit of talking about Green Means Go for several years and having a lot of outreach. We work closely with, of course, the cities and counties. We work closely with the housing community, the development community, but a group that we found we really need to find a way to work more closely with are with the infrastructure providers themselves. Of course, sometimes that will be the city or the county, but a lot of times it's what we call the special district, the sewer provider, the water provider. And you know, it'll vary city by city, but sometimes there's multiple different infrastructure providers within a green zone. And so that just adds the complexity. And they're going to be the ones that are actually going to be doing the infrastructure upgrade that we think would be needed for infill. We need to find a better way to interface with them because I think to date we hadn't been connected with them as closely. And then finally, we feel like we're really well positioned in Green Means Go. We were the first in the state to move forward with that funding package that the board adopted in March. And we feel like we have a lot of traction. We do, it's also a deliverable we owe in one of the grants we've used, a convening next year of sort of kind of what we've learned so far in Green Means Go. We think we'll have a lot to bear. We're of course going to be thinking about lessons learned within our own region, but we also, I think, can position that to also be talking about other parts of the state and kind of what we've learned there and how that might help. So again, you know, going a little bit more into the weeds, but I think the main takeaway is we feel like we have a lot of momentum at Green Means Go, feel like we're in a good position. The funding has been critical. We're going to continue to look for more funding for the program, but at the same time, concurrently, we're going to be doing these activities like working on the policy side, working on the tools side, and working at the green zone level side to keep the momentum going. So I appreciate you putting up with me and going into level of detail, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. Do we have some questions from any board members?
Maybe just one question, comment, Garrett. I think in the next year, it would be really wonderful to find out what other parts of the state have done with this funding, right? Like we started this effort and we know what its intent was, and we're in the process of doing all these really good things with it. So it'd be really interesting to find out what other areas, if they're getting these, well, they are getting these dollars, what they're using them for.
Yeah, that great point, Director Gorian, and just a preview for that. We are tracking our fellow regional agencies, and one in particular point out, so the LA equivalent of SACOG is called SCAG. They're the largest of these in the country. One of their uses is what they say, imitation is the best form of flattery. They are replicating Green Means Go. They have their own acronym for it, but it's very much, and you know, they say they look very closely at what we did in Green Means Go, and they've been pinging us on that. So it's encouraging to see the traction of what we started here, right? That the largest metro area in the state is trying that out down there.
Great. Good question, Director Gore. Anything else?
I will just say, Director Gore, I just want to again reflect back on as we set out to create as you know, firsthand, we try to create a pilot program for our 6-county region. We created a statewide program for everybody, right? Which I do think is important because it suggests the work we still have to do in the state legislature to create something that is truly regional for us. That then you could so we skipped the pilot program step and went statewide. And it's great that other regions are looking at us. And we have very close partnerships with the Bay Area, LA, like Garrett said, and San Diego, and could easily report back some of the ways they're using that funding. And I will just say too, because of the work the board did, the setup to this, I think I got this right, Garrett, we were the first signed agreement with HCD for Green Means Go in the entire state. So we got out the gate, we got it, and it was not easy sometimes to get things signed at the state level, you might imagine, but so we're now really, as Garrett mentioned, among other things that he's referenced in his verbal presentation in the memo, really focused on trying to get some of those federal infrastructure dollars that are all about housing, climate, economic revitalization into Green Means Go. And we'll tell that story another time and come back to you. But interestingly, we're trying to be comprehensive, even as you heard about in Yuba City, and go across all these different asset classes of infrastructure and think outside the box. Many of those federal programs are still very siloed. So we kind of don't fit in any one program, which is a little frustrating for us. But we're working really hard with some of the federal agencies to figure this out. And again, we'll stay tuned. We'll have more updates on that.
Great. Thank you, James. Okay. Thank you, Garrett. So next, we're going to move on to item 6, the 2025 Blueprint Pathways Public Health Performance Evaluation. Dov?
Right. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. This is a continuation of our discussion on the 2025 Blueprint Pathways and their performance. As you know, the pathways, we've been using them as a learning tool to better understand how the decisions that we're making in this blueprint plan on land use and on transportation are going to impact our ability to achieve our goals in the triple bottom line framework that the board adopted last year. So we've explored the pathways through a variety of lenses over the course of the year. We've had presentations, of course, on land use and housing, but also access, road maintenance, vehicle miles traveled, congestion. As part of today's presentation, we're going to be diving into a topic that we haven't actually spent a lot of time on, but one that's critically important, and that's public health. Specifically, how did the built environment characteristics that SACOG is helping to shape influence how healthy our region's residents will be? I'm pleased to say that we have the perfect guest speaker to unpack this relationship today and explore some early results of our analysis on the public health implications of the Blueprint Pathways. We have Larry Frank, who is the president of Urban Design for Health, or UD4H. UD4H works with national, state, regional, local government agencies to address the health impacts of transportation investments, land development, and urban design. Dr. Frank is a professor at UC San Diego, as well as University of British Columbia, where he's published over 100 peer-reviewed articles on this exact interaction between land use, travel behavior, and health. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Really excited to be here. Nice to see you all. I got to listen just to a little bit of your conversation, and very aware of SACOG's leadership nationally and the innovative work that you're all doing together, and familiar with your region a good bit. So I'm gonna first try to show my screen, see if this works. Is that visible? Got it? Thumbs up. Okay. Today I'm going to talk about the work in, as was mentioned, about incorporating health metrics and help help you in your process to more broadly consider a variety of impacts of your planning process. And clearly, land use is front and center in the regional planning process that you're doing. Our work really focuses on measurement and using a tremendous amount of local data, really in California, where we have built over the last several decades. We've actually been developing models to predict various chronic disease impacts, and I'll talk about that. But to start with, the types of decisions that you're making in transportation, land use, urban design or pedestrian environment, that would be micro scale, what we call, but the seating and the urban design features, the trees, and if there's crosswalks or not, or green space, all collectively determine how we get around and how we spend our time. And travel and activity patterns is one filter through which our behaviors are affected by our behaviors and affect our behaviors. So diet, physical activity, social interaction are all examples of behaviors that stem directly from the choice sets that we have that result from the physical characteristics of where we choose to live or have to live. And that also, the health impacts are also a function of what we're exposed to. So if we're more active as we travel, but the air is highly polluted, that's not a good thing. You don't get the health benefits as much as you would have, and it even could be dangerous in terms of exposure to risk and injury, and also noise fits into this discussion as well. So behaviors and exposures through time and space affect our biological response. As humans, we respond in terms of energy balance, energy in and energy out, results in weight gain or weight loss. So travel is a key factor, because travel can be both sedentary, time in cars is sedentary and actually causes obesity, versus being active in our travel actually reduces it and makes us healthier. There's also inflammation that results from exposure to air pollution and our physical activity levels, and stress. So stress, inflammation, and body weight, or BMI, body mass index, all interact as well through time and space to affect physical and mental health outcomes. So I've been moving from left to right, and here you see hypertension, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, and other chronic outcomes. On the mental health side, depression, dementia are all also being measured, and we've been building models and to predict how these factors of our health are impacted by the environment. And then on the after we do all that, we're also looking at the healthcare utilization and cost. So the economics behind these relationships, which in fact are really important and massive. So as was stated earlier in your conversation today, and I'm sure you're thinking about every day, is the infrastructure funding that's available at the federal level, and what kinds of decisions does that infrastructure funding are looking for at the regional level and local level to prioritize, and how to make you the most competitive you can be in the work that we're doing to support you. So, obviously the focus is on climate resilience, equity, and safety, repair and maintenance of the existing system, but also all the different factors listed, but really health and equity and or social justice are all really front and center in the fact that chronic disease is highly concentrated in the most underserved members of the population, and that is really clear. And there's a very spatial location specific aspect to this, and really there's a lot of ways that this research can help target investments to have the greatest health return on investment. So in summary, built environment, we kind of describe both macro and micro. On the macro side is really access to opportunities, regional accessibility on transit versus roadway, getting around, but to and from centers within or mobility hubs, as I think the term's often used, whether they be in urban or not so urban settings in developing communities, but also creating complete communities. And walkability really is about that. It's about having destinations, live, work, play within the neighborhoods where we all live and work. And then the pedestrian environment I mentioned earlier. So I think important to frame this discussion is really to also discuss the difference between recreational versus utilitarian travel. Active travel can be both recreation and destination based. Both forms result in physical activity that can reduce downstream chronic disease. Absolutely. However, sedentary time, including time spent in cars, causes obesity and downstream chronic disease. Time spent in cars has been linked with obesity and chronic disease in numerous studies globally. I did the first one myself 20 years ago, and I really didn't have an intention to study that. It was a derivative or outcome of a huge study that we were doing in Atlanta in the late 90s and early part of this century. But each additional hour in a car is associated with a 6% increase in the likelihood of obesity. There's a lot of hours in cars. So this is a population level impact that has massive implications. So the best way that we've been able to find through the research to achieve a win-win relationship between health-based co-benefits and climate mitigation can be achieved through the inclusion of active travel structurally built into daily life, destination-based utilitarian travel. So what that says is that you can achieve recreational travel through the design of development wherever it goes by providing amenities to make people want to be active when they're no longer needing to travel to other places. However, it's structurally integrating it with their daily routine so that you can accomplish things that otherwise would require a car when you get that synergistic win-win. So in order to address these issues, over the last several decades doing all this research, which we've done numerous studies, large studies, building the science funded by NIH, National Institutes for Health, mostly, but other agencies. We started to build in the late, about 15 years ago, actually working with SACOG staff, what became the National Public Health Assessment Model, which is a scenario-based tool. It's bringing health into scenario planning and forecasting. And that's what this tool does. The Strategic Growth Council and the Office of Policy Research about 10 years ago helped us build it for the state of California. And then we went to the national scale after that, funded by EPA, and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has given us support throughout the years as well. So NFAM, this diagram we start off with critical factors that drive health outcomes are our demographic characteristics, who we are, our age, ethnicity, or race, income, vehicle ownership, family structure, employment, and other characteristics are very important, and we all understand that in terms of predicting health outcomes. Then there's the built physical environment characteristics, built and natural, and those are listed there. Obviously, density, access to destinations, green space, transit access, bike and ped infrastructure, and other characteristics are there. And then we have a modeling process where we integrate all these data sets, spatially join them predictively with predictive models, and then apply the predictive models to given geographies and future build out scenarios for your region or other regions. We've done this in 13 regions now across the country, and we're learning each time more and more about the modeling. Well, the modeling is all peer reviewed, and that part we're building off of a large foundation, but each application is unique, and we're always taking in new information to improve the way to communicate and learn how to build on what we've already done. So these are the outcomes that we're able to predict. You can see them on the right. There are even more, but I'll talk about a few of them now. So your work in Sacramento with your different, within the Blueprint Pathway process, allocates 278,000 new households. And the way we've structured this analysis, working with SACOG staff, is to look at how the allocation across the different development types that are inherent, how these different scenario pathways play out. So pathway 1, outward expansion and limited infill, more car dependent, relatively speaking, all else being equal, but less development going in the center, a little more towards the edge. Pathway 2 is a balanced approach with infill and phased expansion, and pathway 3 is focused infill and limited outward expansion, as you well know. So you're very aware of this map. These are the different community types where growth is allocated through those 3 different pathways. So the difference across the pathways is for the 200, for the new households moving to the region, where will they go? So that's really what's different about the different pathways. And you can see on this map, of course, center and corridor communities in red, established communities in gray, developing communities in light purple, and potential developing community areas in dark purple, and then rural in kind of a beige color over here, and then agriculture elsewhere. So for coronary heart disease, health outcome number 1 is coronary heart disease. We modeled and compared, here's pathway 1. So I'll draw your attention as the blue bars is the distribution of new households. The red line is the prevalence rate. So you're probably familiar with and seen the data showing the distribution of households by pathway. And that's what's here in the blue bars. What you haven't seen before is the red line. And so what we do know from the evidence based on the California Health Interview Survey data that we use for this project, which is our state level health prevalence data set. It's an excellent data set, and we spatially join that with, which gives us health characteristics by census block group with the environmental characteristics that we use as our explanatory measures that I've already described, built in natural environment features. So what we see is increased prevalence rate as you move from centers and corridors to existing communities, to developing communities, to rural residential areas. So that increase is just what the data shows us is the rate at which we see and observe chronic disease, this particular one, distributed. So we have now based our first scenario, or so pathway 1, you see here. Pathway 2 is being compared to pathway 1. So compared to pathway 1, 5.8% fewer new cases of coronary heart disease is predicted based on what we know today of the relationship between coronary heart disease and the environmental factors, built and natural, that are in the distribution of in these 4 community types. So this is showing a relatively less, a bit less chronic disease of this particular type. Now, pathway 3 is a bit more aggressive, a little bit more focused on compact development, centers and corridors, and less development going into existing communities, and in particular less into developing communities. And here you see an 11.4% fewer new cases compared to pathway 1. This is just what the data that our models show would be the case if you applied the relationships we have today to future build out scenario. Now we're going to talk about hypertension. And here you have, again, the distribution. So there's higher hypertension, high blood pressure is more prevalent in society. So here you see pathway 1, the percentages, the prevalence rate of high blood pressure from the centers and corridors, existing communities, developing communities, and rural and residential areas. And so we then compare to pathway 1, pathway 2, and we see a 2.1% fewer cases of hypertension overall. And you see the distribution, of course, more development going into developing communities, less into centers and corridors, and probably a similar and a little bit more into existing communities. Pathway 3 for hypertension is, as expected, a little bit, again, less cases, fewer cases of hypertension compared to pathway 1, where you have considerably more development going into centers and corridors versus existing communities and developing communities. So that's the pattern. Again, in summary, the distribution is what changes, and then the prevalence rate gets applied. So I just provided a summary of coronary heart disease and hypertension. We've also looked at type 2 diabetes. We're still finishing some of those analyses and hope to be able to share that with you soon. And then cost of illness is an extrapolation of these relationships where a dollar sign is applied based on evidence of what the cost is annually of having a particular chronic disease. And we see about a 4.2% reduction in pathway 2 relative to pathway 1, and about a 7.8% when rounded reduction from pathway 3 relative to pathway 1. And pathway 2 saves about 1.35 billion over 30 years, and pathway 3 about 2.5 billion over 30 years. Now, this is just looking at a cost of illness, when in fact there's many other factors involved that are even bigger. So for example, here's a study we did for SCAG. I know earlier in the meeting you mentioned Southern California Association of Governments, LA's MPO equivalent of SACOG. So they have a $12.8 billion allotment that they have set aside through their bond money to spend on active transportation. It's a lot of money for active transportation, very attractive for other modes. And so this was a study that we were hired to do to evaluate the economic impacts in a fairly robust way. And we're writing this up now. So this is about $6 a return on investment for every dollar spent on active transportation, which is the combination of healthcare cost savings, which we showed for you, but also workforce productivity. So big return on investment there. But there are many other ways that active transportation infrastructure provides economic return on investment that you're well aware of, including the effect on land value and other things. So here we see a very significant payback of 113 billion over the life of the plan with this multiplier. This did not take into account elderly population, and it didn't take into account other chronic diseases. So I thought I would wrap up by saying, the results that we presented, although we didn't show the diabetes results, this is something that we've studied elsewhere. And we do find as you move from towards more walkable environments, less chronic disease and less cost. But what we're looking at with your analysis is just the percentage of the new population, not taking into account the whole region and the existing population that live there. So this shows more extreme. And I will make the comment that we are observing significant health benefits in moving from, the most car dependent to even somewhat car dependent and somewhat walkable. We do see significant reductions. And I think they're more in the order of magnitude that we showed you and the results that we had for your scenarios, which average a lot of growth going into different types of places. So here it's isolated into just unique environments. So I would say that you can have leafy green, moderate levels of density around your mobility hubs and still gain significant health benefits from shorter trip distances in cars and also some more active transportation happening. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you today. These are our preliminary results, and really thank SACOG staff for being so helpful and working with us so closely to get to this point. But significant reductions in chronic disease and related costs were observed for pathway 2 and 3. But the results that you see are fairly conservative. They do not capture the indirect effects of workforce productivity or economic impacts of transportation investment on land value. I think I'll stop there. And if you want, I will explain a few of the other limitations, which as a scientist, I always like to convey. Thank you so much for your attention.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Frank. Are there some questions from directors or comments?
I don't know if I have a question, but I thought that your graphic was really helpful to show the built environment and then the outcomes and what the outcomes you see. This was really fascinating. So I just really appreciate it, and I'll let Director Kozlowski ask his question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Fascinating collection of sort of data and concepts. I'm wondering if the relative straight line that you found between the time people spend in their cars and health outcomes is somewhat overlaying the sort of economic condition of people spending a lot of time in their cars, and how do you tease those two things apart? Because a community like I come from Folsom, which is a suburban part of Sacramento County, lots of people drive into the city or other places, and hypertension is part and parcel of a kind of affluent diet, and a bunch of other things as well. So for instance, I'm just wondering how you draw the line between those things.
Good question. I think I understood it. I'll try to respond and then tell me what I missed.
Well, so I guess I'm thinking in terms of you have kind of low income communities that have pollution issues, like Oakland, for instance, which are pretty walkable, honestly. In terms of the people that live there and not being as dependent on traveling long distances for jobs potentially. And then you've got someplace that's a leafy suburb like Roseville or Folsom or where have you, that we spend a lot of time in our cars. So how do you jibe those things?
So the model, the time in cars model, the reference to it early in the talk is based on each additional hour in a car. So it's relative. So what it does is it holds a constant or control based on the average person. And then each additional hour that they spend in a car, we observe a 6% increase in the likelihood of obesity. That's what that study found. And it did the same thing for each additional kilometer that a person walked. We observed about that's 0.6 of a mile. Think of it roughly half a mile was about a 5% reduction. So in order of magnitude, you can kind of almost say, the more you walk, the less likely you are to be obese, and the more time you spend in a car, perhaps even more so. And we expected the reduction in obesity from walking more, but we had never contemplated time in cars as an obesity predictor. But of course, it makes complete sense. And the point is that I think from a policy perspective is that even if you can build communities to support more active transportation, it's difficult to get around the fact if it's a more outlying area that the time in cars, the sedentary time, is hard to get away from. It's an inextricable reality of being far more dispersed. It's just a fact. And so that was the purpose, is to show that relationship. I think we also control for all demographic factors in that model. So we're isolating time in cars from income. But what would be interesting to look at is a stratified analysis across income. and do a comparative analysis. I think that's what you're interested in.
I think that's what I'm getting at. It feels
think
like
so
there's
too.
one more layer of analysis that could be
Well,
interesting and useful.
It is now, particularly because 20, this is a relationship that's held for decades now. But things have changed, and we had this conversation. Of course, we know post-COVID, there's different, people are spending more time at home, but where their home is located, the walkability of that environment even becomes more important because 80% or so of all trips are not work trips. So can you accomplish those trips? Can you get out and be active depending on where you live beyond recreation? So that's the key there. So I think you raise a really great question from a research perspective. It's now timely to reevaluate because we've seen a lot of the lower income people displaced from the more walkable environments to less walkable. And that's a phenomenon that we need to track very carefully from an equity and social justice perspective and affordability. That brings the housing affordability piece into it.
Yeah, very good. Okay, thank you very much. And again, terrific presentation.
Thank you.
Chair Bradford,
Yes.
I want to be mindful of other board members having questions. If you'd oblige me, I'd actually like to ask a question because I think this is so interesting.
Sure.
And this may be off, Dr. Frank, but as a parent of kids who are now teenagers, is there any way to cut this data or analysis around younger people, 18 and under, and community design, infrastructure? It just seems like, right, the anecdote is, I went to school 3 miles uphill each way when I was your age, and and now, I mean, I worry about kids just being in the backseat of cars and growing up that way. And in some way, I know this is not like a very scientific question, but like basically establishing a culture of, well, I've just been driven everywhere, right? And the indicator of that, which I think is fascinating, is I think this is right, that like younger kids can't draw maps of their neighborhoods anymore, their city. Like we used to have a spatial ability to draw. Kids draw a map if they walk somewhere, and they can't draw maps as much. I don't know if that's true, but I am curious in terms of if we just looked at younger folks, right? And you kind of took the same approach to, land use and infrastructure, and maybe I'm asking you to speculate, but like, would you see a similar sort of these health disparities basically if you just looked at 18 and under?
That's a really great question. We've actually designed our NIH grants, the National Institutes of Health grants, based on age group. And we can actually address that because we did travel surveys. We equipped them with GPS and physical activity monitors known as accelerometers. And we've been digging into that we did teens as one huge observational study, and then kids, we call it kids, but 5 to 11, 12 to 18, and then we did 18 to 65, which is the adult, and then seniors, again, really interesting and really important. So the age groups is exactly how this research has been evaluated. And I actually, on the question, one thing that we were able to look to uncover is, of course, is vehicle ownership. Like each additional car the household has, we observe very different effects on active travel in youth. That's one thing we've looked at and did a while ago. But I think, again, it's timely with new travel data. I don't know the year you're most recent. I think you're just doing a survey, or I heard maybe fairly recent. So with the new travel data, a stratified analysis just focusing on youth. Again, we talked about income earlier, but across age, I think would be very helpful. And we've done that in the past. I have to go dig out some results to be able to answer your question. If I can.
Yeah, that's fine. I figured.
Yeah. No, I think you're thinking the right way, which is household structure. Do parents who have kids versus those who don't? How many kids related to the household travel structure? All that's very important and does shape the travel. And then you have the different point as well in there, which is how we grow up and the culture we grow up into, and how we develop our framework of the world. It also shapes behavior for, how permanent is that, and what is that like?
Thank you.
Some additional comments from directors? Okay, I just had one quick thing, Dr. Frank. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I think the outcomes, right, they made sense. They were really logical. What I found super fascinating was the cost associated with those outcomes, particularly from a healthcare standpoint. I think it's easy to say, well, of course, if we walk more, it's healthier, but to actually have some numbers that say, you know, when we walk more, this is actually the money that we as a community save on healthcare costs. That's tremendous data, and I found it super fascinating. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I mean, we're all learning. When I mentioned the learning process is how do we collectively use that information to impact decision-making and maybe better connect with public health as a sector and those, that's the next, I think that's the part, that's where the point we're at right now is. Thank you for being for observing that, pondering that question.
Yeah, I invited Blue Zone Jiba Sutter to listen in on the session today. I thought they'd find it very interesting, and I'm sure they have. So I know there's a couple folks from there listening today. So thanks again. Any additional questions before we move on? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you again, Dr. Frank.
Thank you.
Okay, next we are going to move on to reports. Do directors have any reports?
Chair Bradford, we're actually on item 7, the 2025 blueprint, MTPSCS outreach.
Oh, thank you. I guess I'm trying to get out of here early.
No worries.
Sorry, Hannah.
It's okay.
So we'll go with item 7 then, and we'll let Hannah do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. So good afternoon, directors. My name is Hannah Chudin. I'm the outreach coordinator on the 2025 blueprint. Some of you might recognize me from various outreach events like pop-up workshops or even the board retreat we did maybe a year ago now. I'm here to talk to you today about 3 things: the focus groups, the pop-up workshops, and a deep dive into the blueprint workshop results. So with the focus groups, during the spring, we worked with a consultant to conduct, next slide. Worked with a consultant to conduct a series of focus groups to get a better understanding of our residents' priorities and concerns in terms of housing, road pricing, perceptions of safety, and public health. We're finalizing the results now, and we will be bringing that back to the committee in September. Next slide. And for the pop-ups and surveys, we have recently closed our blueprint survey and have received over 5,000 responses. These numbers were made possible because of the 28 pop-up workshops SACOG hosted and support from the 12 CBO grant recipients. We have 2 pop-up workshops left, and then we will have successfully visited every jurisdiction in our region. I would like to thank all of the directors that shared information about the pop-ups and the directors who came and visited or tabled with us at these events. Special shout out to Director Bradford. And we are working to analyze the data we've collected these past few months, and we'll be bringing that back to the board in October. Now for the meat of the presentation, the Blueprint Workshop. As many of you know, on June 16th, we hosted the Blueprint Workshop, which brought together nearly 300 elected officials, public agency staff, and community leaders from around the region. Many of the directors on this committee were at the workshop, so I'll just give a brief overview. The goal of the workshop included deepening participants' understanding of how land use and transportation policies affect economic, environmental, and equitable outcomes in the region, highlighting the role of jurisdiction-level decisions and their impacts on the region, and having participants meaningfully participate and contribute to the 2025 blueprint. To give context to what would be discussed at the workshop, the main presentations consisted of the history of our region in the original blueprint, the current state of our region, and a look into the future through the lens of the 2025 blueprint and its role in shaping policies and strategies for land use and transportation patterns over the next 25 years. The main driver of this conversation is that we know our region is growing, and now we need to make choices about what that will look like. This workshop consisted of many, many robust conversations, which was made possible by the diversity of participants at each table. As attendees know, we assigned tables in an effort to make sure each table was as regionally representative as possible. This was done so that when we had conversations about choices, we were forced to consider the regional perspective. This highlighted just how challenging our development process is and the competing priorities associated with it. So with that, let's talk about what came out of the workshop. To kick off the day, attendees were asked what they love about where they live, work, and play. The response is populated on a word cloud. Sorry, next slide. Next slide. Some great photos of the workshop. One more. Here we go. The word cloud shown here, and you can see that folks really value their community, open spaces, and amenities like restaurants. Most of these responses show that what people love about the region has to do with their quality of life. This notion was reiterated in the headlines activity, where participants were asked to create a headline they'd hope to see in 2050. Next slide. When participants were asked to think about the future of the region, a couple key values emerged, including housing, both in affordability and availability, livability and quality of life, active transportation and multimodal options in the trail system, transit, both frequency and availability, economic opportunities, the environment, including agriculture, climate mitigation and conservation, traffic relief and road conditions, and equity. Out of all of the responses we collected, headlines related to quality of life came up the most. The other hot topics included housing and active transportation. I'm going to give you some examples of the headlines we got back. Sacramento region sets model for inclusive and affordable housing initiatives. And the Sacramento region has the best mixed-use walkable communities. This told us that while congestion is a concern, participants are focused on changes that will affect their quality of life through housing and travel options, like homes being closer to where they work, and more opportunities to walk, bike, and take transit to meet their daily needs. These are the theme of responses was consistent throughout the day. Without going into too much detail about the setup of the Visions for the Future activity, I want to speak to what we heard. In round one, when given strategies about how to address the growth our region is facing and to reach their chosen headline, participants focused on active transportation investments, housing choices, and housing growth. In round two, participants were asked to consider the perspectives and needs of a fictional community member, and the CHOP strategies they chose shifted from their answer in round one to housing growth, transit investment, and housing choices. Overall, the feedback we collected spoke to a desire for a mix of housing options, preservation of natural resources, and more options when it comes to transportation. Participants understood that we are collectively creating a plan for an incredibly diverse region with many, many different needs, and so there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So that was just a brief overview. I highly, highly recommend reading the full report and to see more about the structure of the workshop. It's in the attachment. And if you'd have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Anna. Comments and questions from directors? No. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, now we will go ahead and move on to reports. Any reports from committee members? Dov or Clint, anything from you guys?
Nothing from us right now.
Okay, James?
James had to just step out. I think he just got a phone call.
Ah, okay. Well, I do have one quick report. I'll try to keep it pretty brief. I was able to go to the Congress for New Urbanism conference way back at the end of May, beginning of June, and represent SACOG at that. I went with Chair Kennedy and Casey Bazan as well. And just a few quick takeaways from that. I know I shared some at the board meeting that we had in June, but James had asked me to share a little bit with this committee. So my notes here are from 2 months ago, so it might be a little rusty. But I think one of the biggest takeaways, I went to a session about communicating with elected officials about new urbanism. And one of the things, so the panel was essentially moderated by a city manager, and then had that city manager, city council on the panel themselves. And so they were asked a lot of questions about kind of their experience, and kind of, it was in a suburban area of Dallas. So kind of in, kind of convincing, maybe a better word would be informing these council members about the benefits of maybe more walkability and bikeability and those kind of things, and maybe different density options and housing choice. And what all the council members relayed was the importance of going and seeing those things firsthand. And so the city manager had taken the council members to all different kinds of places across the region and potentially elsewhere, I'm not sure, so that they could really get firsthand experience with the quality of life that a lot of those things bring. And so that really stuck to me from the standpoint of, I think SACOG has done an outstanding job with that, with both our pre-cap to cap trips and also some of the other visitations that we've done over the years since I've been on the board, and certainly before that. I think it's just night and day when you actually can go see those things firsthand and experience them firsthand. It really can influence, I think, your opinion, as opposed to just, you know, seeing a presentation about something or hearing something, right? When you can experience it. And I know I have found that even with my constituents, if I just use certain words to describe those things, you know, the response is one way. But if it's more descriptive and, hey, would you like you know, kind of a mixed use downtown built in the community where you could walk around and have restaurants with housing on top, right? Everyone gets really excited about that. And so I thought that was a great point. Also, I went to another session where one of the key points was, you know, units or density isn't what makes urbanism, it's people. And I know some of the things we've talked about is it's not just creating density in units, right? It's about having a place, and even with respect to walkability, you need a place for people to walk, right? You need a safe place, you need something that's interesting, and you need destinations. You need to give people a reason to want to use that walkability, right? If you just put in bike paths, but they don't really go anywhere, you know, they might be used for a little bit of exercise, but they're certainly not going to be used for trips, right? So how can we design those with mobility actually in mind? Anyway, those are just a few of the things I learned that I just wanted to pass along. So, James, anything from you?
Yeah, thanks. I think this may have been mentioned already, but we are, it was in my director's report, which I hope you got yesterday over email. Really excited. Director Bradford, thanks in advance for hosting the August 17th SACOG board meeting. I want to remind everybody that is in Yuba County. It will be at the Health and Human Services Building, just south of downtown Marysville in unincorporated Yuba County. The workshop for August 17th is actually going to be around infrastructure investment in disadvantaged communities and the Blue Zones project that Director Bradford just mentioned, all of which I think relate to the health data that you just saw, and also relates to the lunch session if you were there around defining disadvantaged communities. 9:30 start on the board meeting. The City of Marysville and Yuba County staff and Blue Zones would also like to extend an invitation to all the board members for a walking tour of Marysville, starting at the Brick Coffee House in downtown Marysville. We'll get you the address. It's in my update. So for board members, we'd love to see you there. I know a lot of our Yuba Sutter representatives here would love to have you there. Love to show you a little bit of downtown. If you haven't been to downtown Marysville, it's an amazing historic place. But also they are doing a lot to try to improve walkability, to try to improve infrastructure, planning for hopefully a future rail station coming with the extension of the ACE and the San Joaquin service north of the Sacramento Valley. So 8:30 a.m. start for the walking tour and 9:30 a.m. start for the board meeting. If there's any reason you can't attend, I'm sure you've let Lynette know already, but please do let us know because we have some members who can't attend and want to make sure we have both a quorum, but also just a good showing to support our partners up in Yuba Sutter.
Great. Thank you, James. Appreciate all that information. And I'm definitely looking forward to hosting everyone up in Yuba County in 2 weeks. And hopefully you'll all be able to come up a little early for the walking tour. I guarantee you will enjoy the Brick and you will enjoy some of the other things we're going to walk by. I think we're going to take a walk over to the Silver Dollar Saloon, which dates back to the 1800s, 1800s, and I think was actually still a brothel into the 1970s. So it's got a fascinating history, and hopefully, in addition to being able to see it, you can hear a little bit more about that too. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting if there's nothing else, and hopefully see you all in 2 weeks. Oh, is there something else? Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Gary.
Thank you.
Feel better.